Hey Blue Group. So today we're going to extend our understanding of fractions by looking at composing and decomposing them. And it sounds a lot scarier than it really is. All it is getting us to think that when we talk about a fraction such as 3/3, we know that that's represented as one whole, or we can say it's 1/3 and 1/3 and 1/3. We could also say that it is it looks like I needed a space here, so I'm looking at that right now. We could also say out of that 3/3, so here's my 3/3. If I'm looking at just the fraction 2/3 here, I can think of that as 1/3 plus 1/3. So when we're adding, it's basically what we're looking at is we're doing an introduction into adding fractions, and when our denominators are the same, we can add them very easily. So when there's 1/3 and 1/3, we can see, oh, now I've got 2/3, right? The trouble is going to come into when I need to add 1/4 plus 1/3, and that happens all the time. Like when I'm trying to have a recipe, because it's just me and my husband here, and we can't eat a whole giant pan of pasta, so I want to take that recipe and break it down into half, or I want to double it or something like that. Sometimes I have to add mixed fractions, and that can be quite complicated. So before we can get to that step, we need to make sure that we can realize that if the denominator, if my pieces are the same size, then I can add them fairly easily. So if you look at this activity today, it says using an index card or included cutout, cut out your rectangle carefully into 4 pieces. Think about how each part of that rectangle is 1 unit. So 1 unit, so 1/3, for example, or 1/4, for example, 1/5, right? 1/2. Those are units. We want to see how it takes 4/4 to make one whole. So here's the activity added sheet. So I can cut them out so that way they're perfectly partitioned. And then if we go down here, it wants me to see what is 2/4 equal to in fourths. Well, it's going to be 1/4 plus 1/4. So if I could take my fractions and add 1/4 and 1/4. What is 3/4 equal to? What is 4/4 equal to? Up here, you can use these pieces as well. Yes, so this is just some extra workspace for you here. Today's activity is fairly simplistic, so I do want to encourage you to extend it a little bit as much as possible beyond just fourths. So I did go through and wanted you to notice using 6 equal-sized 1-inch paper strips, cut out halves, thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, and eighths, and label each using your units. Think about the pieces of a whole and how that relates to fractions. So while the activity only says to explore fourths, I thought that going into some different fractions would be helpful. I did also figure out that the links are working if you copy and paste them into your browser, so you can take a look at that there. The YouTube videos, some of these worksheet pages, again, were not working, so I'm trying to figure out what's going on with that so you can have some additional practice. There is a Nearpod code on this that's going to give you some good practice, as well as some quizzes codes. Quizzes are going to give you that instant response. I'm going to send this link out on, sorry, one second, there we go, on I referenced it yesterday, but I'm going to go ahead and send this for Seesaw. And what it's going to have you do is decomposing just means to break it up. So we're going to take 8/10 and we're going to see how many different ways we can come up with 8/10. 8/10 could be 2/10 plus 6/10. It could be 1/10 plus 1/10 plus 1/10, all the way up until you have 8 of them. I think there's an example down here. So we can see that she partitioned it into 2/10 and 6/10 to equal that 8/10. The goal here is that we're making 8/10, not 10/10. For example, we are looking at 8/10. So notice that each of these fractions is still missing 2 of those squares. But it's basically getting us to understand that adding fractions with like denominators, so when the denominator is the same, we can decompose, break them apart into their pieces, or we can add them back together to get a sum. So it's, again, just looking at that denominator. If the denominator is different, we have a different process, and we're going to talk about that another day. Decomposing is saying I can break it apart into the two components. Composing is putting them back together. So for example, if I've got 2/3 here, plus 1/3, I know that now I have 3/3. Decomposing, taking it apart, 2/3 plus 1/3, adding them back together to get that composed 3/3. So it's just being able to visualize that we can take our fractions as a whole or as a part of our whole, and how we can break them up into different formats depending on what type of problem we want to do. So I could have a problem where it says there are, I have a pan of brownies and there are 2 boys and 5 girls, but I need to save 1 piece for dad when he comes home. So how many fraction units am I going to be using? I'm going to use 2/8 for the 2 boys and 5/8 for the 5 girls, and then I need to save that last over 1 to make that whole. Now I've got 7/8 brownies that are being eaten, but 1 being saved. So it's just a way to get us prepared for some word problems and some things like that. And just to realize, just like in basic addition, we need to know that our number 5 isn't just a numeral symbol, that it's actually composed of 5 parts, and we can take those into having 5 individual parts, or we can take them into 2 and 3 or 1 and 4. So it's all of those things that you guys already are exposed to, just now you're the experts on it, and now we're going to apply it to something a little bit more challenging with these composing and decomposing fractions. So again, for your activity today, let's see if I can find it real quick. It does say just using fourths, and that's what the attached pages are, is on fourths. However, if you go back into the suggested for today, focus on taking fourths, and then also into fifths, sixths, halves, and thirds, and eighths if you can, and label each. So knowing that it's 1/4 plus 1/4 is 2/4, you could even do this. 4/4 is 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4, or you could think about it differently and you could say it's 1/4 plus 3/4. Just challenge your thinking and seeing how many different ways that you can come up with it. I would like Blue Group to try to get some time where we can do like a Microsoft Teams meeting where we can check in and see how things are going. Depending on how our schedule goes, I will send out possibly for Thursday. I know we have that live quizzes, so we might not have enough time on Thursday, but I am thinking depending on if I don't have any other meetings going on, I will send you guys a link and a time for us to meet. Maybe we could meet in the afternoon, like 1 o'clock or something like that, and just check in and see how things are going. And then hopefully we'll get something on the schedule that's a little bit more consistent, where we can meet maybe every Tuesday. We can meet to go over the skill for the week or something like that. Just because these are new things and you don't have these in front of you to take and move around. So anyway, today you're just exploring that idea of composing and decomposing fractions. So I will go ahead for Seesaw and I'll link this page, this decomposing and composing fractions page, in there for you. So that could be your practice for today if you want to do that, in addition to the fourths for your activity. And then we will take a further look at it some more tomorrow as we look at activity E. There we go. So activity E, we're going to decompose these numbers. Whereas up here, we're talking about a whole. So we're talking about 3/3, 4/4, 5/5. Here, we're taking it down into the parts. So the activity that I'm going to link today for Seesaw is kind of a combination of these. It's just going to get you to think about it a little bit differently with some different fractions. So if you have any questions, please reach out to me and let me know. Otherwise, we'll talk to you soon.